Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the interview.
Today we are joined by the member for Prahran in his office actually, Sam Hibbins. Sam, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for making the way here.
No problem. So, just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about you, could you give us a little brief explanation of yourself just before we get into the questions?
So my name's Sam Hibbins. I'm the state MP for Prahran. I was one of the first Greens ever elected to the lower house of the Legislative Assembly, so the lower house of the Victorian Parliament, which is known as the Legislative Assembly. So that was back in 2014. And I've had a range of portfolios within the party room. Right now I am the spokesperson for Treasury and Economic Justice, and I'm also co-deputy leader along with Sarah Mansfield.
And you recently got that up deputy leadership a couple months ago, wasn't it now?
Yeah, that's right. So Samantha Ratnam, our former leader, has stepped down to run for the federal seat of Wills, which is very exciting. I think she's going to do fantastic in the upcoming federal election. And Ellen Sandell was elected as the new leader. And yeah, I was able to be really honoured to be elected by my colleagues to be co-deputy leader.
Yeah, hopefully, have a long career as a deputy leader. Maybe down the line you could become the leader of the Greens in Victoria. Who knows what could happen.
Just happy to be the member for Prahran at this stage.
I'm going to think too far ahead, but yeah, you might as well get straight into the questions, sure. Sam. So my first question to you is, how was your high school and university life, and do you have any memorable or specific moments you'd like to share?
Oh, well, look, when I think about my time at say, high school and university, look, it was a bit of a journey. I didn't do that well academically out of high school. I mean, I was interested in things like politics from a young age, but that didn't really translate into really good results for myself out of high school. So when I left high school, I didn't go straight to university. I worked for a while, and then after some years, decided I wanted to get back into education, and my first port of call there was TAFE. So I went down to did a liberal arts course down at Frankston TAFE, which is where I grew up, which is a fantastic course. And then from there I was able to then go and study social sciences, youth work at university, and from there have a career from there. And I was actually able from some time then to go and do my postgrad as well. So it was a bit of a journey to get there in the end. But yeah, it just goes to show that, whatever your results come for high school students, there's plenty of opportunities out there for you.
Exactly. And how long was that break between finishing high school and going back into university?
I think it was a couple of, at least two to 3 years before I went into TAFE.
Oh, yeah. That's quite interesting, because I know a lot of young people now sometimes don't know exactly what they want to do after high school, and taking that sort of 2 to 3 year break in between high school can really clear your mind up and really set where you want to be in the future, because it's a lot of pressure to put on someone at such a young age to decide what they want to do for the foreseeable future of their career. So
yeah, well, that's right. I mean, obviously a lot of students, particularly first year of uni, you might want to change courses or you do something different. So yeah, for me it was being able to work and what have you. It was really that was my journey, and just the importance of the TAFE system as well. I just think can't be really shouldn't understate that. I mean, the fact that I had it was a good TAFE. It was local to me. It was very easy to get to. It was affordable. Like, the fees were quite low at the time. It just really goes to show just having that TAFE as part of a really solid core of the education system is just so important.
Completely, because I know as well the government's been putting out some more free sort of TAFE courses out there, which I think is important, because a lot of people, as you said, might not be suited for university straight out of high school, so that sort of TAFE course is really, really important. And just going back to your high school life, Sam, you said you were really interested in politics. Like, what was mainly the reason why you were really interested in politics during high school? Was there any certain reason, or?
Look, we were we talked politics in our family. I remember when I was young, we always had the sign up at it was the local Labor candidate always to come election time. We'd have the sign up on the farm down in Hastings. So my parents were obviously involved in politics as well. So it was always a topic of conversation. Certainly something I was interested in from a young age. Fortunately, by the time I got to 18, I was well and truly in the Greens camp, so I always voted Greens.
And your parents are more Labor sort of voters?
They're well and truly Greens.
Really? Oh,
yes.
so they've switched because, as you said before, they were a bit more Labor sort of, but they've moved over time.
Yes, as many have done.
Many have done, yeah.
Yes.
Even some Liberal voters as well have moved over to the Greens. So
that's right.
It's quite an amalgamation of many sorts of.
Well, you could say it's the Labor and Liberal Party leading them.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the Labor Party is very different from what it was, say back in the 80s, what have you. They probably adopted a lot of more the neoliberal style economic policies. And then of course you've got the issues around refugees and what have you that brought a lot of people over to the Greens. Similarly with the Liberal Party, particularly for what you'd class as small L Liberals in this area, the Liberal Party that is now is just a completely different beast than it was in the past.
That is true. So we'll move on to our second question for you, Sam. So I believe that's with you, George.
So prior to entering Parliament, you served as a councillor in the Stonington Council area. How was the overall transition from being a councillor to being a state member, and did you experience any challenges from this move?
Well, from the outset, so I spent 2 years on Stonington Council, and I really can't speak highly enough of people being on council, running for council, and that level of government. It's really close to the action. You're a decision maker from the get-go. There's lots of opportunities to get things done, to represent your community. So it was a really rewarding part of government. Moving over to state politics, it is different. Number one, on the plus side, as a councillor, you've got to be, basically most people got a councillor and you've got to have a job at the same time, really. Or you sort of do part-time work or what have you. Whilst being an MP, I was able to do what I loved basically, but as a full-time role, and so got to do that, all the time rather than just part-time all the time. That was really rewarding. The difference is though, in state politics, you're much more just a bit removed from being the decision maker, sitting around the table, making things happen. You've really got to be advocating and fighting for what you want. Sometimes things can take a long time, years. Issues that you fight for can take years. Obviously, it's a lot more political role. You're making the political case for a lot of the things you want to achieve. So it's a bit stepped back, a bit removed in that regard. So yeah, there's a few differences there.
And as you said as well, a lot of councillors have to have jobs outside of being on council, just because the pay's not very that high. And I know there was a bill that came through Parliament last week actually around local government, giving the government the right to remove certain councillors if they're misbehaving. So I guess in some cases, some people may say the pay is a little bit too, and that sometimes increases the sort of negative behaviour that councillors have just because they don't have as much pay, so they try and be more corrupt. What do you think about that?
I think some of the issues that we've had around corruption and integrity issues at local government, it's really, the system really should be set up so the influence, particularly influence around property developers, what have you, they shouldn't be able to donate to campaigns. There should not be any opportunity for that link. There should be much more stringent disclosure around donations and that sort of thing, and those sorts of connections at a local government level, similar to what we're now seeing at a state level. I think that's the key thing, what you're seeing at the local government level. Look, in terms of the legislation that the government brought in the other week, I think it did eventually pass Parliament, although we were opposed to it. Look, yeah, at times, and this has happened on a number of occasions, there can be some really problematic individual councillors as part of a council. There needs to be on councils a certain level of, even though people come from different backgrounds, different political viewpoints, there's got to be a real sense of being able to work together, or some, some collegiate. If you have people that are just there to disrupt or to not really have that sort of overview of council. It can be really problematic, and I think a few councils have come unstuck that way. That said, that bill basically then gave the minister the right to expel a individual councillor with not many checks and balances around that. That just again opens it up for political abuse at the state level as well. So that was our concerns with that bill.
Mm-hmm. And there's, as we said previously, council's a very, very important role. It's very, very community based. And as we've had in our councils, we're in Wyndham Council in the West. There's been a lot of corruption scandals in the past, George, especially around some certain figures in councils. So I think in general, it really should be as you said, round table sort of community based. Because at the end of the day, not many of them are part of political parties, and a lot of them are independent. So it's really about delivering what's important for the community. Because council really, at the end of the day, a lot of people just really want their bins collected, their garbage picked up, streets to be cleaned, that sort of thing. So,
well, I mean, they have a broad role. I think councils have a really broad role to advocate on behalf of their communities and represent their communities. So I wouldn't just necessarily say it's all just sort of like basic service delivery. They do, they provide other services that they really need to meet the needs of their, the diversity of their community. So they do a lot, councils, they do a lot of heavy lifting, I think, in that regard. Yes, you have a lot of so-called independents. A lot of them are members of political parties that don't disclose that. The Greens run as declared Greens at election time. For you to it's important for transparency. But yeah, I think it is important, really important form of government that really probably doesn't get the kudos that it deserves.
That is true. That's very, very true.
If you're looking at the current housing debate, the councils are being sort of portrayed as sort of villains holding up development, all that sort of stuff, when the reality is there's thousands of approved dwellings by councils that developers aren't actually actioning. So I think they can cop a bit of unfair flack in that regard sometimes.
Interesting, yeah. I think we'll move on now to our third question, Sam. So this is a little bit about your time as a social worker. So prior to Parliament, you worked a little bit in the social works area. What are some of the Can you talk a little bit about your career as a social worker and how important are they to the Melbourne community?
Yeah, so I worked in social services, so I wasn't a social worker. I did a little bit of casework during my time, but I also worked in other support roles, both for the Youth and Family Services in the northern suburbs, Crossroads Youth and Family Services, which is run by the Salvation Army, and then in the Department of Human Services. Looking at across performance and quality around things like disability, child protection, those sorts of things, and just reflections on my time working in social services. You really get an appreciation of just how important, just the fundamentals of life, or the fundamentals like making sure someone has a house that they can, they've got accommodation. Making sure that, for example, someone can catch a bus to, either their TAFE education provider or to work. A lot of the young people that I worked with were in the outer suburbs, and the reality is, if they didn't have a bus, but they, didn't have a bus near them or went anywhere at any reasonable hour, or they couldn't afford the fare.
They couldn't get to work.
Yeah, well, they can't get to work, can't go to TAFE. Perhaps they'd use other methods to get around that probably might, be crossing the bounds of legality or what have you. The importance too, again, of TAFE. For a lot of young people who were either disengaged from education, disengaged from work, they knew that to get in, their next step, if they wanted to move along, they needed to be able to go to TAFE. So that was really important. So that was the really, just those absolute fundamentals. Then looking at sort of the sector itself, the same issues that I was faced then, the same now. You've got a lot of short-term contracts. You've got a real lack of remuneration within the community sector itself. It is largely, there's a predominantly feminised workforce, which, under an underpaid workforce. So a lot of those systemic issues makes it even more difficult for the community sector to do the job that it needs to do.
And you know, such a vital such a vital job to have, because you know you are dealing with some of the most challenging, you know, some of the most desperate people in the community, and that sort of services are very underpaid, and you know you want to try and attract more people towards, you know, those sort of services to deliver those sort of good outcomes towards those people who really need it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. I think we'll move on to our fourth question then, George.
So what would you say is your proudest moment in the last 10 years as a member?
Got a few, to be honest. I think from a broad perspective, the great policy change that I really championed from day one was getting rid of faith-based schools had the right to discriminate against LGBTIQI+ students. So that was sort of, when I came to Parliament, that had sort of been left out of the most recent round of anti-discrimination laws. In fact, there was a special carve-out there, and it was, you know, it created an untenable situation for young people who, you know, maybe at that age they were sort of coming to terms with their sexuality, understanding their sexuality or gender identity, and yet they were faced with the prospect of potentially being, you know, kicked out of their school or expelled. Similarly, teachers either had to cover up who they were, or, you know, some didn't even apply for jobs at faith-based schools because they weren't sure whether they'd face discrimination around behind the door. And these were really insidious laws or carve-outs, because, you know, you might have some schools that put up their hand and say, oh no, we don't discriminate or what have you, but how are people supposed to know that? You know, no one really knew that. So I really pushed hard for that to be removed. I think I moved legislation a number of times, came up with my own private members' bills, but it really took until last term for the government to get moving and finally get rid of that exemption that allowed discrimination for LGBTIQI+ students. And we're seeing this same debate play out at the federal level now, because there's also federal anti-discrimination laws, and government just moving so slowly. You know, we had, despite promises, gosh, way back when Scott Morrison was, you know, Prime Minister running for election the first time, promises from both sides of politics to get this done, but then sort of this big refusal to act. So it's been a tough one to crack. Done it now here in Victoria, now it's to be done at the federal level. Locally though, I had a couple of local pet projects that I'm probably really pleased to see. So when I first got elected, South Yarra Station, which was one of the busiest stations outside of the CBD.
We just used that just before.
There you go. So previously before the upgrade, there was like a really tiny footpath. The tram stop was just a regular tram stop with no sort of level access. There was no footpath across Yarra Street. It was really congested. And again, that was something that I worked really hard, really pushed, and managed to finally get some funding within my first term, and then finally get that done in my second term as well. And similarly, and it was great to have some you know, people who living, you know, use wheelchairs and what have you, come and, you know, use that facility as well, because it's so important that we have transport for everyone in our community. The other one was around St Kilda Road bike lanes, again, something from day one that I'd been pushing for. A few false starts in terms of the government saying they were going to do it, but finally, over time, you know, a lot of pressure from myself, from the community, got that done as well. I mean, that's one of the best cycling facilities we've got, I think, in the city.
100%, yeah. You know, you just see around this sort of area, like as well, when we were walking around, it's a very, very, you know, public transport friendly sort of an area. There's a lot of, you know, cyclists, a lot of people walking, that sort of thing. So I guess that sort of public transport upgrade was really, really important. And, you know, South Yarra Station, as we went past, it's, you know, it's a pretty big station now, and it's very, very upgraded. So I guess the community is very, very appreciative of the advocacy and the work that you did, Sam, too.
There was a lot of community support behind that. It was probably my most popular campaign ever, so yeah.
We'll move on now to our next question for you, Sam. So, who would you say is your political role model or idol?
Well, I mean, as a Green, you know, you can't go past Bob Brown, really, from the get-go, and I think he's, for a lot of us, certainly for mine, he was like the first Greens politician that we ever knew. You know, he was in there, he was flying the flag, just one senator, Bob Brown, in the federal parliament before any other elected Greens, and his story of one, of course, campaigning in Tasmania against the the damming of the Franklin, like someone who's really lived those green values. And I think even recently now reminded of him, standing up to George Bush when against the Iraq War, when George Bush came to address federal parliament. So throughout his career, just someone who's really stood up, fought the good fight, lived by the values, and someone I know just inspired. His being the sole voice during that time, certainly my formative years looking at politics, really inspired me as someone, the Greens of the party for me.
And would you say there's anyone else as well, maybe in 21st century? I know Bob Brown was. I know Bob Brown was not too old. He was around the 90s and that sort of thing. And as we said, and I've said previously in the podcast, the Greens were really the first. The Australian Greens were really the first ever Greens political party in the whole world. Were there any other sort of political role models and idols, even in Victoria as well, that you look up to?
Well, I know my good friend Sue Pennicue, who was a former Southern Metro MP and is now actually a councillor with the city of Glen Ira. She's someone who is, really helped me. Her advice really helped me get into politics. She spent a lot of time with me before I was elected, and then whilst I was elected, her sage advice was always someone you always go to when you need a level head and you need someone to give you some really good advice. Really good values. So yeah, Sue's always been an important person that I always seek out.
That's really good as well, that you have that sort of person that you can rely on a little bit, when you're struggling with one sort of bill or something, offering someone who's previously been in Parliament as well, and they give you that sort of advice is really crucial. I think we'll move on to our next question then, George.
What made you join the Greens and what made you run for the 2014 state election?
Well, from my perspective, joining the Greens, so I was always politically interested. By the time I was 18, I sort of felt the Greens were the party for me. I think our values really matched up. It then took me probably another 6 or 7 years to actually stump up the courage to actually join the party, go into my first branch meeting. It was down was over in Malvern, I think. It was just around a kitchen table.
Were there many members at the time then, or in the?
Maybe about 5 people at the table. So yeah, it was.
This is the 1980s and 1990s, or
no,
2000s?
The 2000s. So this would have been 2008, 2009, around that time, and from there, I helped out at a by-election. I was asked a man named Michael Henry, who'd been the founder of the branch, asked me to stand at the next election as a candidate for Higgins. That, at that time it wasn't classed as a winnable seat for the Greens. So I just ran, had a good time. I did the same again at the next state election for Malvern. And then I thought, I might have a chance of getting into local government, because we never really, I don't think, ran a really big campaign for local government here in Stonington, and I was successful there. As I said, I really like local government, but the opportunity came up when the Greens thought Prahran was a bit of a winnable seat, and we're going to make it a priority, a target seat. And so I thought, well, I've got to take this opportunity. And we ran, I ran a really big campaign, probably the biggest we've ever seen this side of the river, and managed to get over the line by just a handful of votes. So yeah, that was the journey. That was a journey here. As I said, I like my time at council, but this opportunity came up and I grabbed it with both hands.
And as we've seen since 2014 as well, the seats become safer and safer every single election. I think that's credit towards your community advocacy and that sort of thing. And that's what you see a lot with a lot of Green seats, as the members been there for quite a number of years. You can see they've become a safer and safer seat. As we've seen with Melbourne federally with Adam Bann, and with other seats across the country.
Well, I think there's a lot of distilling of myths once you have an elected Green. Certainly when I first started, a lot of people are unsure about the Greens. Greens MP, just didn't really know, just really uncertain. Knew we stood for the environment, but just thought we might have been a bit too, too over the top or too radical or something like that. But once you get elected Greens, people understand, you get to know you. And I know out of my office, because I have that social service background, we help a lot of people, particularly in public housing, whether it's a big issue or small issues like rubbish on their street. We're really here to help people, and I think that goes a really long way in people understanding who you are, what you stand for, and that obviously translates into a good result.
Yeah, and as we've previously said, there's a lot of public housing, especially around the Prahran, St Kilda area. So really trying to help those people in need, especially from your social service career, is really important. I think as a local member, it's something that you got to strive to do.
Well, I kind of have a bit of a no wrong door attitude when it comes to people walking in. I always try and help them wherever I can. I never sort of say, oh no, that's not us or anything like that. Just always try and do my best for people, which is kind of the attitude you got to take in social services as well.
Exactly. And yeah, I think we'll move on now to our final question for you, Sam. So finally, what's one piece of advice you give to students in 2024, especially those now who are maybe going to do their Year 12 exams or beginning to do university in semester 2?
Well, look, I guess my advice would probably be more around if they are interested in politics or what have you, or are interested in the world around you. I know a lot of young people, you see the student strike for climate. So I know there's a lot of engaged young people out there. And it's really critical as well, because some of the challenges that we're facing in society, the next generation of people are actually going to be worse off than the generation that came before them, which is just absolutely appalling. So I'd really encourage young people, but yeah, what we're kind of up against then is cynicism, or a feeling that no matter who's in power, no matter who's in politics, things aren't going to change, or a feeling that this is just the way it is and nothing can change. And I can tell you that's absolutely not the case. So I just really encourage people, young people, just not to lose hope. Be engaged, be active in the issues, reach out to your elected rep, consider, running, joining a campaign or running, putting your name on the ballot yourself, all those things. I think it's just so critical, because the moment people sort of switch off or disengage or decide, no, it doesn't matter what you do, this is always going to be the case, that's when, that'll just
fails at that point.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's always, as you were saying, it's always been really important to try and be as active as possible in democracy, whether it be joining any sort of political party, I think, in general, no matter on the political spectrum. It's important just to push those sort of issues. And at the end of the day, if you work hard enough, things can change, and it can be better for your local community.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. So those are all our questions for you, Sam. Wow. I really do appreciate you coming on the podcast and speaking to us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hopefully, we can speak to you again soon, maybe in a couple months' time, couple of years' time, if we've got any other sort of issues that we want to address with you.
That would be fantastic. Thanks so much.
Yeah.